Hello, everyone. So I hope you all enjoyed the previous session as much as I did, and also gained some insight on the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and how youth will play a role in it. Right now, so I just want to quickly share with you the Slido results from our first poll about where you guys are joining us from, and we have a clear winner. I think almost 40% of you are joining us from their beds. So I'm happy you're all seeing, you're participating in this event from the comfort of your home. Now we are going to see after the Slido, as you can see here are the exact results. So 39% of you guys are joining us from their bed. That's great. Now we're just going to proceed with the next session, a restoration recipe, ingredients for restoring our planet and reclaiming food. For the session, we are going to be joined by young individuals coming from all around the globe and with different backgrounds. I want to invite on stage to moderator Fruzina Nagy, environmental scientist and economist, and our speakers, Noor Bahar, plant biologist, Kendi Borona, conservation professional, Kiati Rator, Environmental Defense Fund, Thiago De Sa, biologist, and Theodore Barna, landscape architect.
Hello, everyone. I hope my screen sharing and mic works. I would like to welcome everyone on this session, Restoration Recipe, Ingredients for Restoring Our Planet and Reclaiming Our Food. We will have a panel discussion today with 5 amazing speakers, and we are going to discuss essentials for landscape restoration projects. Let's imagine that restoration is a dish we want to cook. So what are the essential ingredients that we need to make into this dish or put into this dish? How do we create a great recipe? This youth webinar explores a global dish called restoration, originating from diverse social settings and inspired by very different ecosystems. We would like to explore together what are essential ingredients for these restoration projects. I am Fruzina Nagy, and I'm a master's student in environmental science at the University of Wageningen and Cornell University. And today I'm representing Wageningen Youth for Landscapes Forum, WOLF. This session is co-hosted by YIL, the Youth in Landscapes Initiative, and WOLF from Wageningen University. So let's take a second now and imagine that restoration is what we would like to have cooked at the end of this session. Before having our amazing speakers joining this session and discussing this recipe, I would like to turn to you, to our youth audience and everyone else who is watching this session. My question is, what ingredients would you put into this dish? What facilitates you? What facilitates you or your project to be successful? What do you think are the key ingredients for this restoration? So that is the question. I encourage you to share your experience and opinion on our Slido poll that you can now see shared on the screen. To do this vote or to do this poll, you need to follow the link that is shared with you in the chat. Or alternatively, you can just go to sli.do, sli.do, enter the code on the slide, GLFBON 2020 that you see on the left side on the screen right now. And in the popping up list, just select youth and share your answers with us. Again, the question is, what do you think are the key ingredients for restoration? We welcome all answers, and right now we will close this window. However, the poll remains open, and we will return to the answers towards the end of the discussion. First, we're going to introduce our speakers and have the panel discussion, and then we're going to look at the answers. Please feel free to vote during the whole time of the session. So now, let's kick off the session and introduce our first speaker. Please welcome Noor Bahar, who is a plant biologist from the Tropical Rainforest Conservation and Research Center. She manages restoration projects and collaborates with local communities in Malaysia.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So my name is Noor. I'm currently based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where I work with Tropical Rainforest Conservation and Research Center, TRCRC. So we are an environmental NGO, and we looked at effort to conserve and restore the forested landscape in Malaysia. So our core work focus on the seed collection, seed surveying, but then we gradually expand to do restoration work because we need home to place for the seedlings that we've been collecting. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. Our next speaker for today is going to be Thiago De Sa. Thiago is a biologist and a member of Rede Panque Bahia in Brazil. That's a very hard thing for me to pronounce. He and his organization promote rediscovering the use of unconventional edible plants. Now let's see what he has to share. Thiago, could you please turn on your mic and your camera and quickly introduce your project and who you are?
Hello there. So my name is Thiago De Sa, and for the past 6 years, I have been working with unconventional edible plants. So we have a network, which is Rede Panque Bahia, and we have been doing this work in the state of Bahia in Brazil. So we rediscover and we promote the use of some plants, the so-called unconventional edible plants, that they have been used in the past as food, and today they're not very well known. So we aim to that. We aim to increasing the biodiversity of the food that we eat.
Yeah, thanks, Thiago. I heard you're also working with local communities to facilitate food sovereignty and create resilient ecosystem. Maybe you can leave your cameras on, Noor and Thiago as well, but have your mic still turned off so that you're already part of the discussion. Thank you for this introduction. Our next speaker is Theodore Barna. Theo is a landscape architect, and in his project in Suriname, he is creating a multifunctional spatial vision to restore a coastal ecosystem. Now, let's see what you have to say, Theo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Theodore Barna, and I'm a master's student landscape architecture and spatial planning in Wageningen in the Netherlands. Well, my journey to mangroves started firstly due to the passion that I have for coastal landscapes and my academic interest for ecosystem restoration. Therefore, I dedicated my master thesis to research and design a case study in Costa Rica about the relation between mangrove ecosystems and tourism. Currently, I am engaged in my second project in Suriname, where I'm aiming to create a spatial vision that integrates all the composing parts of what a landscape is: social, cultural, economical, and ecological. And the project is in its beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Theo. Very inspiring projects as well that you're working on. Our fourth speaker today is Kiati. Kiati Rathor as a special project manager at Defend Our Future. Defend Our Future is a nonprofit project. Kiati is bringing a unique perspective to this discussion from an urban ecosystem. Welcome, Kiati. Could you please introduce yourself and your project?
Thank you, Fru. Thanks for having me on this panel. Like Fru mentioned, I'm Kiati Rathor. I'm speaking to you from New York. I work with Defend Our Future. That's a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering young people from across the spectrum to lead climate advocacy effort, be it supporting local communities, to voicing bold opinions to the lawmakers, to political leaders or their corporate employers. My current work focuses on engaging young people, professionals, students to drive private sector ambition on climate action and policy advocacy. And in the past, I worked with the New York City Mayor's Office of Resiliency as a fellow to study the climate mitigation and resilience value of natural infrastructure assets, that is the green spaces in urban ecosystems. And today I would share my experience and my thoughts with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiati. I think you have a lot to say on the youth engagement as well as on the private sector engagement in today's discussion from a very special perspective. Now, I would like to welcome our last speaker for today, Candy Borona. Candy and her colleagues work with local communities towards seed and food sovereignty in a memorial garden. Candy, would you like to talk about this project a little bit and introduce yourself?
Thanks a lot. My name is Candy Borona, and I teach at the School for Field Studies in the Kenyan program. This is based in southern Kenya. And this is a study abroad program for undergraduate students who are in various environmental related issues. So they study in Kenya in a conservation kind of landscape. But one of the things we do is work very closely with the local community who are the Maasai people in that region in various environmental projects. One of the most recent projects we've been working on is a memorial garden in honor of Professor Wangari Maathai, Nobel laureate. And that garden is currently has 600 trees, and these are a combination of indigenous tree species, fruit trees, and a few exotic species. And the garden is designed, as I said, as a memory to her work and her struggle and her legacy, but also as a teaching space, as a space for research, and also a space for community engagement in terms of ecological restoration, getting into the discussion about seed and food sovereignty, getting into the discussion about traditional medicine or indigenous medicines, land use, land change, and things along those lines in terms of creating healthy ecosystems with different parties that are involved in that landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Candy. So we have 5 amazing speakers from very diverse contexts, very diverse ecosystems. And I would like to kick off the discussion with a question: what elements, what ingredients do you think are essential for this dish? Maybe you could reflect a little bit on your own experiences, own projects, contextualize a little bit more for our viewers, what projects you've been engaged in, and what do you think from this project the essential ingredient is? Maybe Thiago, can we start with you?
Well, so in my experience, the most important ingredient is knowledge, but it has to be a knowledge that is related to the community or the group we're talking about. So otherwise it's meaningless. And so we're promoting the use of unconventional edible plants now for about 6 years. And one of the first intervention that we made was in an organic market that happened within the grounds of the university, Universidade Federal Bahia. So we started promoting and educating the customers about those plants. So we distributed seeds, seedlings, we had lectures, and we did that so the public would know what we're talking about which plants they could be used. We talked about plants that their mothers, their grandmothers used to use, and if they were interested in bringing them back to their plates. And we're doing that with the customers. And also we did with the farmers that were selling the products. We asked them if they had any plants that they used to eat, that they use in their food daily. And most of them, the great majority of them had those plants, those so-called unconventional edible plants. They produced them, they ate them, but they didn't bring them to the market. And after a few years now, they all bring those products to the market. The customers ask for them. and they started to grow and started to bring them to the market more often. So I believe that knowledge is essential, the knowledge that related to each and every group. If we go do that in another context, like we had in other communities, the products may be different, the approaches may be different, because it's really anchored on that traditional knowledge that the community has.
Thank you, Thiago. Yes, you've been mentioning traditional local knowledge as well as collaboration, as our audience has mentioned, between different actors. As people are bringing these to the markets, there are buyers, there are other entities related to this project. Noor, can you relate to this, what Thiago said?
In my project specifically, I think the key ingredients is especially the local buy-in. So we need to know that we have genuine interest and also commitment from the key stakeholder in the sites that we want to work, especially the sites for restoration. So in Malaysia, for example, we need to identify for a certain area who is the landowner and who are the key players in that landscape, because then we can find out who would be interested in really like involving in the discussion and also putting some resources. In our case, for example, the case study that I used in Royal Bloom State Park, where we're working with the local indigenous people, the Jahai community, it was very important for us to build up the trust and also to gauge the interest and the priority of the Jahai community. So one of the goals of the program is to create an alternative livelihood for the Jahai community through the buying and selling of seedlings of the seeds that are being collected from the forested area within their traditional village. I guess because they see that there's some incentive both in terms of knowledge exchange and also in terms of having a new avenue for livelihood. They see that the program will benefit them and they do have stake, and they know that they wanted to participate as a way to contribute to the conservation of the forest.
Noor, so impressive, and you concluded so well. So there is knowledge exchange. You talked about knowledge exchange, community livelihood, and ecosystems as well. Theo, I think you might have something to add on here.
Yeah, well, my project is on a very large scale, so therefore I have many stakeholders involved. I would pinpoint that communication is probably one of the most important elements I've found in my project, because having a common vision between local community, regional governments, and national governments, as well NGOs, it's very important to have a language that everyone understands where we are going through. And my background as a landscape architect teaches me a lot that one image is very strong. So if you can communicate with people on hand of images, you might reach much easier a common sense that everybody knows where we are going through. And something very particular for my large scale approach is, let's say, a landscape system approach in which you understand that impacts caused on the coast can be actually generated more inland. So that's why it's very important to look at the whole landscape, not just of the coast of Strip, but also to see inland what possible changes have been made in order to that have deteriorated the system. These are my two focus points. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you, Theo. Kiati, you come from a very different ecosystem as Thiago, Noor, or Theo. Do you see similarities or some differences between your essential ingredients and theirs?
Sure, absolutely. I agree with everything that my colleagues here are talking about. There are two things I would point out. One, we need investments. We need higher contributions to meet our targets, especially at the speed and scale required to to meet our, let's say, targets in alignment with Paris Agreement, with our 1.C degree Celsius targets and so on. And in doing so, the role of private sector is crucial, not just through financial support, but through leading innovation, using their influence for advancing environmental and climate policies. The second thing I'll talk about is collaboration. I'm not surprised that my colleagues here and the audience in the Slido poll agree with us. And the collaboration, not just between government and the private sector, but within government agencies. Drawing from my experience in working with government agencies, a small example, if you think of a park or a small neighborhood, you're trying to implement a restoration project, you need to jump many hoops. You need to coordinate with agencies that have jurisdictions, be it the Parks Department or the one that maintains roads, city planning department, so on. The point I'm trying to make here is that these layers create redundancies of resources, planning, and investments. So instead, we need a consolidated cross-sectoral approach in tackling these issues. And while I'm talking about a smaller scale, the same holds true for international level, especially since climate issues and environmental solutions often transcend any geopolitical or socioeconomic boundaries. Thanks.
Thanks, Kiati. Very interesting to hear how an urban perspective relates and somehow differs as well from landscape perspectives that your colleagues have talked about. Kendi, could you also contextualize your project a little bit and say what your essential ingredients are for a restoration project?
I agree with all that my colleagues are saying about the ingredients that you need for success in these kinds of projects. The first one, which was mentioned by T, was knowledge systems or indigenous knowledge systems. In the project that we are working on, which is a memorial garden, and I said we have various tree species there. We understand it or we look at it through the lens of knowledge because all of those trees and the tree products are used by the community, either as food for livestock, because the Maasai are a pastoralist community or partially pastoralist, but also for medicines, also used in sacred ceremonies and ritual. So there's that act of when you plant a tree, it's not just about ecological restoration, it's also feeding into these other realms of politics, philosophy, culture, belief systems, and so on. And then the other thing I would talk about is sustained community engagement. Most of the time in my part of the world, you have lots of NGOs who are doing short-term projects, either 1-year project or 2-year projects. Even 2 years is pretty long. But this, I don't think you can have a strong impact or sustained change if your project is very short-term or you're not committed to run the project for the short term. And this is also tied to financing. Most donors will tell you a 1-year project or 2-year project and so on. So I think the mindset needs to change in terms of, if we are doing a project here, we have to commit in a reasonably long-term kind of way if we are able to see impact. Look at the work of Wangari Maathai. She has worked in the Kenyan landscapes since the 1970s. And it's only in 2011 that we started hearing about her work through the Nobel Peace Prize nomination. That's like 3 decades of commitment to something. You can see the results down the line because people have understood that, at least in the areas that I've worked, where she worked with communities in ecological restoration, that when you plant trees, you plant seeds of peace and hope. And they look at ecological restoration as a governance issue, as a way to engage with social issues at the community level, and so on. So the way we've conceived or conceptualized trees or ecological restoration could be narrow in the sense that mostly we look at it as an ecological thing, but it has so many other different dimensions and so many other things that you can do around trees or seeds or things like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Candy. So you brought a very important element into this conversation, which is time. Restoration needs time. Most of you have mentioned in this introduction still or contextualization of your projects, investments, time, patience, collaboration, cross-sectoral or multifunctional approaches. Let's look at a very critical point that is often mentioned in discussions about landscape restoration. It influences the success of the projects. Let's talk about institutional frameworks. I am sure many of us who are working with landscape restoration have faced issues with institutional frameworks that can facilitate, but at the same time also challenge our work. What is your experience? So the question again, in your experience, what institutional frameworks could facilitate your work, and where are the barriers? And maybe Candy, we could start right with you. Do you have any experience, because you have been working with this garden, sustained community engagement? I'm sure you have something to share with us.
I think I would say one of the institutional frameworks that hasn't been there in my case is an investment in education about indigenous knowledge systems. Indigenous knowledge systems are subjugated knowledge systems across the world. These are people who have been told they have no knowledge, they don't know anything. If it's about restoring a landscape, it's probably someone foreign from somewhere else coming to tell them how to restore their landscape, yet they've lived in that landscape for millennia. In the case of Africa, this is the cradle of mankind. So people have been here since the emergence of human beings into the scene or in the world. So the missing link, one of the missing link, I would say, even in broader environmental issues, is knowledge, the acceptance, and the deliberate investment or in teaching and in education and the education system. I only got interested in indigenous knowledge systems way past my university education through working with communities. That's when I could see there was this base of knowledge at the community level, which no one seemed to think was important, not the government, not various NGOs working at the community level, not even the community themselves, because they've been made to feel like they don't know anything. So if they see someone else coming from outside, then they think that person knows. But what do I have to teach an elder about a landscape and he has lived there for 80 years? What can I teach him or her about that particular landscape? If we had that in the education system, and not just in the formal education system, even in education outside the school or university system, where people mobilize around the knowledge systems that they have, I think it would make some good traction in terms of resolving environmental issues, not just landscape restoration, many other issues.
Thank you, Candy. Very, very inspiring what you're saying. And if you, with your project, can influence that, that's impressive, I think, and very motivating for youth and our audience to engage in such projects. Now, you talked about a very long-term institutional framework, education systems, acceptance, mobilizing knowledge systems. I'm very curious, Kiati, how does it work in urban ecosystems? Is there anything more on the short-term matter, or do you have the same feeling about restoration in urban areas?
Right. Well, we are speaking of all these amazing projects that are being implemented. I'm listening to keywords, communities, the local government, the regional government. We count on these institutions to deliver results. However, in most cases, there's very little autonomy and resources at disposal for them. And that is especially true for developing areas in the world. The current COVID crisis has made it evident that unless we strengthen all spectrums of our society, economy, and institutions, we are only as strong as our most vulnerable sections. Through the right financial and resource allocations, we need to enable capacity building, ensure technology transfer to strengthen the developing countries, and especially the local governments that are the front-facing institutions on ground. At the same time, we need higher accountability and contributions from the developed countries to enable this. And that being said, our planners and policymakers need to detach from conventional ways and rethink our decision matrices, our institutional frameworks. While we're adopting innovative technology, we need to integrate traditional knowledge, like Candy very nicely pointed out. And these traditional ideas have proven effective for centuries. And in addition to that, we can leverage the strengths of both our government agencies, the private sector, and our civil society organizations.
Thank you, Kiati. Noor or Theo, do you have anything to add to this topic?
I can add. I think I would like to build on the point that Candy gave on how restoration projects especially require long-term commitments. And the issues that I see working from non-governmental organization, most of the funding that we got is from CSR funding. And these CSR funding are mostly in I would say in a small chunk of fund, and it's not enough to sustain the whole completion of the project. So I hope, or I was wondering if there is opportunity for creative way of financing. For example, maybe if we can combine or compile 3 different sources of funding from 3 different companies, CSR fund, to be able to sustain the whole project. At the moment, I don't see that's happening, or maybe I haven't explored much, but we are looking into, how do I say, distributing the fund over a bigger range, or distributing the fund to cover wider range of projects, so that we know that our project is not short term and has more impact to the community. Yeah.
Thanks, Noor. Theo, you have also raised your hand. Would you like to go?
Well, yes. I also have the point of funding. It's quite an interesting point. But I would also like to emphasize on the fact that you have to have a sort of institutional cooperation. To come back on what Candy said, I actually agree a lot that such projects have to be joint projects. I cannot come with outside knowledge while the whole landscape is shaped and managed by local knowledge. It's very important to finance from both ways and to have this cooperation also in terms of funding. And the barrier that I have been encountering in my project is the time. When you have many stakeholders, they see different time lapses. For example, a local community which is fighting erosion on this coast, they would like a solution tomorrow if it's possible. For the regional government, the national government, there are political promises and there is a political time frame, and that's all shaped by elections. International NGOs function in different time lapse. So yes, we can talk about funding, but there's also the time lapses which differ quite a lot. And therefore, you might have very different views on how this could help. Thank you.
Theo, just a question right back at you. How did you deal with this in your project?
Well, my project is right now in an analysis phase. I'm writing a proposal, but I haven't been totally funded. I just funded a research for this. I'm still trying to see ways in which funding can go to the community, and together we can develop a vision for their coast. And very little to add. To be more precise, funding has to, in a way, bypass the political system, because there you get delays, you get difficulties in which this money is pushed for the community and for solving this problem. So it's still in research.
Thank you. Very interesting points. And I see a very interesting link between what you said and Kiati said, the autonomy of the local communities, and the funding and the collaboration that surrounds it all. Thiago, do you have anything to add?
So, I mean, our work with Hidgebank Bahia has been made with very, very, very little funding. So we rely mostly on the local knowledge, on the local people and the communities to carry on with our work. And you must all know that in Brazil, we have a very, very dangerous situation. I mean, our democracy is in hazard. And in the last 2.5 years, our government has approved hundreds of pesticides, and our policies, our environmental policies has been like completely trashed. So we have a politic today that incentivizes deforestation and extensive agriculture. So it's very hard for me to say, talk about funding. I mean, we had scholarships cut off. Universities have very, very little funding today. But it's not all bad. I mean, we have a great public interest on the subject of unconventional edible plants. We have media coverage, and we have people interested in growing their food and knowing where they come from, on diversifying their diets. So, I mean, I have very little to add. I mean, what Kenny said, education. And we need to have long-term education about these subjects. But from the funding point of view, we're not a very good situation in Brazil.
I understand that, Thiago. And I think right now, even with also with the COVID crisis, many countries are deciding for cutting back on certain environmental policies that have been supporting restoration. I think we're approaching the last part of the planned questions. And now we have been talking about difficulties, challenges, as well as opportunities in restoration projects. Now, I would like to make these theoretical elements a bit more grounded in a suggestion for the youth, for our audience. So the question is, how do you think, based on your experience, youth can be engaged in restoration projects, or more engaged in restoration projects? Kiati, maybe we can start with you as a professional who engages youth in her everyday life.
Yeah, I'm rooting for the youth. We have seen millions of young people stepping out to express their bold opinions and taking actions. You know, youth voices have gained a lot of power in creating political will and creating accountability. Young professionals are demanding their employers to take bold actions. And that being said, they're not just out there in marches and rallies, but are getting involved hands-on, leading efforts on ground and volunteering in both green and blue landscape restoration projects. What our institutions can do is to provide them with the right tools. And my advice for young folks would be that they need to keep up this momentum. There are organizations out there dedicated to supporting their activism, to provide opportunities to engage, to have resources to fill any knowledge gaps. So don't hesitate to reach out and utilize any of this. Every initiative, every voice counts, and your efforts are highly valuable in supporting what we are doing. Thanks.
very empowering, what you have said. Noor, what do you think?
I think based on my experience so far working at TRCRC, I see that there's so many different aspects of restoration, and which means that for the youth who want to engage in the restoration program, there's so many avenues that you can participate. So it's not just about planting trees. You need to know a lot about the species diversity. You need to know a lot on where to source your seeds. You need to know who's the landowner, how to talk to the landowner, how to engage with different state agencies, private entities. There's so many different skills that are valuable to contribute to a successful restoration project. So I think even though maybe you don't see how directly you can work with restoration for now, but whatever you're doing will contribute in some aspects of restoration, definitely.
Thank you. Kenzie, I would like to turn to you. You have been talking about education, knowledge systems. How do you see the role of youth?
I would say, and I would urge the youth to study their history of the context they are in. If you're in the whatever Kenyan context, I mean the Kenyan context and the African context, study the history, because some of the issues, and I think all of the issues that we see manifesting as environmental issues, most of them are tied to governance, either in the present or in the past. There's a historical background to it. You cannot solve a problem that you don't understand. So I would urge the youth to engage with history. Often we've been told history is learning about those things that happened in the past, but history is about the past, the present, and the future. Everything has, there's a cause and effect relationship for most of the things that we see. And once you understand the context that you're working in, then pick whatever project it is that you want to work on, whether it's tree planting or seeds or whatever project that you're working on, and pursue it relentlessly until you become someone who knows everything that there is to know about that particular thing in your environmental context or in the broader area that you are working on. I think knowledge to me is a very good base to start and to sustain anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Thiago and Theo, please share your experience as well. First Thiago and then Theo, and then we're going to turn to the audience questions.
So for me, the first thing I would like to say to all the youth watching now is always believe you can change the world. I think that idealism is paramount to anything that we do. And from the perspective of unconventional edible plants, I think we are always looking at the past. We're looking at what our ancestors ate, what our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers used to eat. And we have to know where we come from. I mean, Brazil is a very multi-ethnic people. We have African origins, we have indigenous people, we have Europeans of several nationalities. And we as a people, we do not understand the role of each culture in what makes us Brazilian, genuinely Brazilian, not European, not African, not indigenous. And we need to look at the past to understand where we are now and where we're going to. I mean, we must believe that we can change the world. We must believe that there's a place for us out there. So for me, believing in that was really important. And I think that's important to our youth.
Thank you, Thiago. Theo, please go on. I know that you have a very interesting approach to youth engagement.
Well, look, my coast, where I'm working, doesn't have a beach. We have to mention that the Surinamese coasts are very muddy coasts. So you lose a lot of attraction towards the coast. It is also a very dynamic place with a lot of wind, and it's quite surrealistic. Well, the only way in which I can tell a story that attracts youth is be inspiring with some art projects. With a local artist, we were thinking, how can we use all the debris and all the wood that has been storing there because of the currents of the sea. We were thinking to create wood structures that would mimic sounds, movement, and like this to reshape the interaction that people have with the landscape. Of course, I agree a lot, and it's also something I thought a lot, is food. The coast, the sea produces a lot of seafood, which is very important for Suriname. But the debris and the garbage has really taken my attention. How can you raise awareness, first of all, about the restoration, and second of all, about an environmental problem? And a very particular part of this art project is, I call it Cinderella project, because there were many shoes in my 4-week walking on this coast and taking pictures. I found probably 50 different shoes. And we also brainstormed about how can we make an interactive art project in which we can find a pair from one shoe. It is still a beginning, but I've had a lot of sympathy with this idea. I hope I can establish it next time I am able to go there. Thank you.
We hope as well too. Thank you for sharing this amazing project. We talked about youth empowerment and engagement at the same time with all of your experiences, which I think is very interesting. However, unfortunately, time is a limiting factor for us right now, and we need to turn to the audience questions. We selected one, and Candy, it's going to go to you. The question is as follows. How leading organizations, countries in this topic are planning to engage youth and guarantee protection in countries where protect our landscape means sometimes risk your life? Candy, did you understand the question?
No, could you read it again?
Yes, I'm asking my colleagues to post it also in the chat that you're seeing. But the question is, how leading organizations, countries in this topic are planning to engage youth and guarantee protection in countries where protect your landscape means sometimes risk your life?
Okay. I think every organization has a different strategy in terms of youth engagement, and youth engagement has become quite a thing in the present days. It wasn't always like that. But you find, like in the African context, you have a very youthful population. So if you're not engaging this population, then you're losing a big demographic of the people that you should be directing your message, your engagement strategy to. So I'm seeing organizations deliberately crafting youth-oriented programs or giving youth platforms to share their ideas, or designing their messaging in such a way that the youth could it could resonate with the youth. In the Kenyan context, there's a language known as Sheng, which is a fusion of English and Swahili, and that's a language that has developed mainly from the youth. And I'm seeing organizations engaging with this in the larger landscape, not just in conservation. So I think every organization has its strategy in terms of the risks. Perhaps what the person is referencing to is areas like national parks, where you have generally, I would say national parks are very violent spaces, especially for communities that live around there, because the perception of Africans is that they are poachers and you need to stop them from poaching, which is a problematic issue in itself. Of course, these are spaces also occupied by wildlife. So I think, and I believe, and I've been making the argument that we need to work towards a larger conservation of compassion, of trying to bring all the parties to the table and agreeing on a conservation strategy that is not oppressive or dangerous, because it's through these contestations for resources and claims to land. I mean, these are the historical issues that I was speaking about. in many cases, communities living around national parks, for instance, believe, and they are correct, that the land that is occupied by the national park is theirs, that they were evicted from there so that you can create this conservation area. So we have those kinds of tensions in conservation areas, and I think we need dialogue and also equitable sharing of resources across the landscapes in which we are working, so that nobody feels oppressed. You get violence and conflict when a group of people feel that they are oppressed, or that they are not getting what they deserve, or what is truly theirs, and stuff like that. The other thing in terms of conflict is that conflict is also a byproduct of environmental degradation. And it also ends up degrading the environment even further. I think the work of Wangari Maathai clearly illustrated that there's a link between conflict and environmental destruction, because if you destroy forests, then you destroy water sources, and there's no water to put downstream, and then you have a problem of conflict. So I think it's trying to work with different parties and resolving those kinds of issues.
Candy, thank you so much for sharing this. Unfortunately, time is really limiting us right now, and I know that all of you could share so much answering this question as well as the previous questions. However, now I would like to ask my colleagues to share the Slido with the audience, and then I would like to ask everyone to have one conclusive sentence of this discussion. Maybe reflecting to this Slido. Thiago, could we start with you?
So I think collaboration is the key. I mean, you have to respect the knowledge that we have, the knowledge that our ancestors had, and collaborate to make a better world. I think that's the main message I can see here.
Thank you. And I think that reflects very well to your project as well, with unconventional edible species and local communities. Kiati, what do you think?
Well, being an optimist, I would like to end on a positive note here. While we have a huge task ahead of us, listening to the initiatives that my colleagues have shared here, the bold actions, youth leadership, and the collaborations like with Wageningen and GLF, it makes me hopeful that we will continue on this path and create the required global transition. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that optimistic view. Noor, what do you think?
I think partnership with the community, whoever that live on the land, is very crucial to ensure successful restoration project in the long term.
Thank you. Theo?
Well, yeah, of course, collaboration is also very, very important, together with communication and education. It's the basic for the future, to educate everyone in this planet and to make them understand that the landscapes that we're living in sustain our life. And I just seen water somewhere, but it disappeared. The technical part in me just says, hey, water is probably the most important thing that we have to take care of in the future. And we have to do it with love. It also disappeared from here. Oh no, it's there. Yes.
Very sweet. Thank you, Theo. Candy, would you like to share your opinion as well? Just one conclusive sentence.
Yeah, I like socialism, which is quite strongly appearing there. And I think the people that have put it forward are critiquing the global capitalistic system that we have at the moment, which is also an environmental problem in itself. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank all of you for participating today and share your experiences. Now I would like to ask you to turn off your mics and cameras because we're going to turn to a piece of art at the end of this session. It's very nice to close things with a piece of art, a piece of reflection. I'm also leaving the stage. Thank you for being with us, and I really hope you enjoyed this session and have a takeaway on what an essential ingredient into a restoration recipe is. Thank you. Donna, the floor is yours. Goodbye.
How wonderful, the dandelions taking over the tulips in your well-maintained, regularly cut lawn. How crazy they drive you, the thousands of white warriors spreading as fast as a puff. Call them invasive. Weeds. Is there anything more real than this? By keeping on faking it, absolutely nothing is under control. You've tried to fence it, confine it, smooth it to roll. You've tried to sedate it, put it in boxes and square it, simplify it for you to understand. You've tried to organize it, control it, exploit it, thought it could be measured and planned. You pretended for long you could rule it, but no, nothing out there is under control. May the burdock grow stronger and taller. May the nettles take over your garden. Don't dare pulling out any oaks. Succession is not an ecological joke. It's what everything wants to do. Change. Grow wider. Fill in every space. Overflow and break every vase. Escape their own rules once the case. Be like the root of the ground elder that's creeping in your vegetable beds. Be everywhere. Resprout from scratch. Use every cue of a crack. If they put you in a line, start running in circles. Throw your seeds in all directions. Lignify your skin till the armor of the bark. Shade this land. Protect the young. Let the forest come back.